Hi everybody, I'm Susan Mulvihill. Welcome back to our vegetable garden in Spokane, Washington. The hardiness zone here ranges from 5B to 6A. Now if you've been watching my weekly videos, you know that we've had an extremely challenging growing season. The weather has been just crazy, and I know it has been in all sorts of regions. Well, here we are in the first week of September. How did that happen? And I need to focus on harvests. So what I wanted to share with you today is a whole bunch of helpful harvest tips for some of the more challenging vegetables. Let's talk about onions and shallots first. The great thing about these plants is that they tell you when they've finished growing. Their stalks fall over. And when that happens, those plants are not going to grow anymore. In this bed, we're growing Ailsa Craig onions, that's these whoppers here. We're also growing Zebrune shallots and Red of Florence shallots. They all do the exact same thing. So as soon as we saw that the majority of the stalks had fallen over, we turned off the water to this bed. As long as it doesn't rain, we're going to leave them out here and let them dry more. Then we're going to move them into our garage to continue drying. Once all of the stems look like this, just dry and papery, we'll cut off the stalks and store the onions and shallots in boxes in our garage. When the temperatures drop to 0, that's when we're going to move them all into our basement where the temperature is much more pleasant. Whether you're growing winter squash or pumpkins, my tips for harvesting them at the right time are exactly the same. So in this bed, I'm growing autumn frost winter squash and sweet jade kabocha squash. It really helps to know what the mature color of your winter squash or pumpkin is going to be, because that's the first thing you want to look for. So this is one of my autumn frost winter squash, and you can see it's green down here and it's starting to turn a light tan color. That is the mature color. So I need to wait until the entire squash is that light tan. It will even be a little bit lighter than that. This is another autumn frost winter squash, and you can see it is dark green, so this has still got quite a long ways to go. This is a spooky pumpkin, and you can see it is the color you would expect an orange pumpkin to be. So that means I need to go to the next step in determining if a pumpkin or winter squash is ripe. And that is the thumbnail test. The thumbnail test just involves pressing your nail into the skin of the pumpkin or winter squash. If it pierces the skin easily, it is not ripe. If it doesn't pierce through the skin, it should be ripe. However, there's one last thing I want to look for. You also want to look at the stem on your pumpkin or winter squash. It should be a brown color. You can see this is still green, so it tells me this little pumpkin still wants to grow. So I'll just leave it on the vine and check it later. When you finally get to harvest your winter squash or pumpkin, always leave at least an inch, maybe 2 inches of stem attached. That is really important, because if you accidentally knock it off or remove it on purpose, that is an area where mold can develop, and you don't want that to happen. Now place your bets on this little pumpkin. It is so green still. I hope it's going to ripen before we get our first frost, but we shall see. It's anybody's guess. I am so excited to talk to you about cantaloupes. I have been growing them off and on for years, and I know exactly what you need to look for so that you pick them at the peak of perfection. And you know, this bed got off to a very shaky start, but I've got 7 cantaloupes that are at varying stages of ripening. I'm growing Tuscan Napoli from Renee's Garden Seeds, and here are the 3 things you want to look for so that you pick your cantaloupes at the right time. The first thing is the color. So you'll notice this has a very green skin, and this one has lightened up into sort of a peach color. That is a very good sign. Now this might be a little bit hard to see, but you'll notice the stem where it attached to the melon is sort of retracting a bit and pulling away from the melon. The final thing is that if you start seeing yellow jackets buzzing around a melon that has lightened in color, you know it's ripe because they can smell that sweet flesh inside, and boy do they want to get at it. So that would be the third thing to look for. And now for the moment of truth. Look at that. Oh, that is just heavenly. Let's talk about corn. And I know I talked about it in a recent video, but I want to keep all of these tips together in a single harvest video. To know if an ear is ripe, there's three things you can look for. First of all, the silks at the tip of the ear should be just dry and brittle. Second thing is to feel the end of the ear. Does it feel like the kernels have filled out? And this actually feels pretty darn good, although I think it has a little bit more to go. And then let me show you one last thing. If you are really unsure, you can carefully peel back a little bit of the husk and take a look at the tip of the ear. And this definitely looks like it's not quite ripe, so I'm just going to cover it back up. But if you had seen uniform kernels, it would be ripe. Let's talk tomatoes. And if you live in a short season climate like I do, you're probably really getting nervous and wondering if your tomatoes will ripen in time. Well, the good news is that there are a couple of things you can do to speed along the process. And then if you're desperate, you can bring them indoors and let them finish ripening there. About 2 weeks ago, I shot a YouTube short video where I discussed how I start pruning back the tomato vines. And that is a great way to get the plants to focus their energy on ripening the existing tomatoes. So for example, here is the tip of one of my tomato plants. It's got flower buds on it, and there is no way in our climate that those are going to be ripe tomatoes by the time frost gets here. So what I did 2 weeks ago is I pruned back the plants a bit. You can see they look kind of short. I am now going to prune them even harder so that they will focus their energy on ripening the tomatoes that are full size in here. Now what I'm doing is I'm removing some leaves and branches that either don't have any tomatoes on them at all or just tiny ones. But what I don't want to do is to cut all of the foliage off above and around the actual tomatoes, because that can make them susceptible to sun scald, which is where they become kind of sunburned. But I'm definitely cutting them back harder because I want those ripe tomatoes. Now if you're thinking, boy, those sure are weird looking tomatoes. These are paste tomatoes. That means they're more meaty and less juicy, so they're awesome for making things like tomato sauce, salsa, and ketchup. This particular variety is new to me this year. It's called Blue Beach, and a friend recommended it to me because he said it is much more resistant to developing blossom end rot, and I thought that's a very good reason to try that out. Now, if a frost is imminent, you can still pick your tomatoes and move them indoors and still get them to ripen for you. First of all, notice how these tomatoes have started turning lighter in color. That's called the breaker stage. And so when tomatoes hit that point, it's very easy to get them to finish ripening indoors. There are two things that you can do. If they're at the breaker stage, you can just bring them indoors and put them on your kitchen counter and they'll finish ripening. If they are green as can be, you can still get them to ripen indoors. What I do is I move them down to our basement, which is dark and about a constant 50 degrees Fahrenheit. And I put them on sheets of newspaper, a couple of inches apart, just in case one might mold or something. It's not going to spread so easily to the other tomatoes. And just give them time and they will ripen for you. So all is not lost. Okay, that's all the tips I wanted to share with you for some of the vegetable crops that are a little trickier to harvest. The other thing I wanted to mention is that, I try to always start my vegetable gardening videos right in this spot because I think it's fun for you to see how the vegetable garden grows throughout the season. And it's looking pretty wild and woolly this time of year. I hope you found today's video helpful. And if you have any questions, don't be bashful. Just put them in the comments below this video on YouTube and I will answer them for you. Thanks so much for watching today, everybody. Happy gardening and happy harvesting.